it looks like I've snuck up on some exquisite glassware. Now, the glassware is a really endangered species, so we have to be very careful with it. And if you watch closely, you can see it undergoing natural selection. Now, we normally can't see this because it takes hundreds, thousands of years for natural selection to take place. But if we get a close look and get a better understanding of it, we'll be able to see how the glassware can do this very quickly. Now look at all the different types of the same species. Everybody knows that organisms have different traits, and those traits are passed on to their offspring. We can see that these differ in height, just like humans would, right? We've got this one here, which is really tall. We've got this one, which is really short. And then we've got this one that's somewhere in the middle, alright? The food source is way up high for these, alright? The food source is way up here. So these small ones can't get to the food source. It's too high up. So, what we're going to do instead is we're going to see how natural selection is going to take place. Because the small ones can't eat. If they can't eat, they can't survive. Can't survive, you can't reproduce. You're going to have a bad time, alright? If you can't reproduce, you have no offspring. And we all know that if you're short, you typically have short offspring. Now, not always, but most of the time. Alright? And since these guys can't reproduce, as well as the tall ones, we're going to see less of them over time. Let me show you what I mean. These little guys can't reach the food, so most of them can't reproduce, so they die out. Alright? This little booger here, he survives, he gets a chance to reproduce. Congratulations, you had an offspring. Alright? Most of these don't get an opportunity either because these are too tall. These can reach the food. These have a hard time doing so. So we're going to get rid of those as well because these guys die off. But some of those do get a chance to reproduce. Alright? So we got a couple of those. But all of these survive. All of these reproduce. So all of these have an offspring. Alright? Notice the difference in the height between the before and the after. And over multiple generations, we can see natural selection taking place. We can see that the traits have changed. The frequency in the alleles has changed. No longer is the glassware tall, medium, and short, but gradually gets taller over time. Now, think about this. All of a sudden, genetic mutation takes place when two of these have an offspring, and now we've got one of these. What's going to be more likely to survive, these or these? These will, because they're taller. And if they're taller, they can reach the food better than these. These survive, reproduce, and we see taller individuals over time, alright? Couple things to keep in mind. It's all about the environment in which you're placed. This isn't something that just happens for no reason, alright? It has to be something that gives them an advantage in the environment. So this is an advantage in its environment because it's tall. Sometimes being short is an advantage. Sometimes being middle-sized is an advantage. Sometimes being a certain color to camouflage is an advantage. Sometimes certain body structures which mimic is an advantage. It's all about the environment in which you're placed in. Alright? So make sure you understand that. It's not just about the height, but the environment. The environment selects for the traits that are important. And those important traits are the ones that survive. And those organisms can reproduce and pass those traits on to their offspring. Alright? Let's look at another example. So what I want to look at here is natural selection in action. Alright? And what I've done is I have populated my environment with some species, alright? but they all have different adaptations, okay? And we're going to see which adaptation is best suited for the environment. If you remember, natural selection is the process in which certain traits are better adapted for the environment. Those organisms with those traits are more likely to survive, reproduce, and then the offspring are more likely to have those traits. So you see change over time. So what I have here is a randomized population of several different organisms, or I'm sorry, the same species of organism just has several different traits involved. And so this is my lovely predator here, and this predator is going to try to eat as many of these as I can within 30 seconds, all right? So I got to think about, and I want you to sit there and predict. Think about which of these has a better adaptation. What are some adaptations here? You see that there's certainly color, size, shape, right? Some of these beans are shaped a little bit differently than some of the others. So what adaptation is going to be best for survival? We're going to find that out because remember, those that survive get to reproduce, and if they reproduce and have traits that are similar to the parents. So let's see what this turns out to be, all right? I'm going to give myself 30 seconds starting now. So I'm just going to see what I can pick up here. Can't use the sides because that's like cheating. Not doing very well, am I? There we go. It's a lot harder to do with a fork than I thought it would be. My 30 seconds are probably about up. Oh my goodness, are they ever? I'll give myself a couple more seconds to maybe try to get a few more here. Oh, come on! Gosh, no wonder. Okay, good enough. We'll call it good there, alright? So look and see what we got here. Which beans do you think were most likely to be eaten? All right, think about the traits that are available here. We've got mostly these big, large beans. So that tells you that a large-sized bean is less likely, all right, to survive. The beans here, if you watch this and look over several generations, so we're going to time-lapse this here in just a second. Actually, we're going to do it now. Let's show a time-lapse of what we would see after about 4 or 5 generations. All right, so I did this a few more times, and you can see here that there's certainly a difference here than before. Which trait seems to have survived the best? Which variety of organism? And you notice that the little split peas here, the little green beans here, were the ones that survived the best. And we can think of several reasons why that's the case. First off, obviously size is a factor. The smaller you are, the less likely you are to get eaten by the predator. So the small beans get to survive, they reproduce, and pass those traits on to their offspring, right? Thus resulting in more small beans than before. We also look at the fact that these are actually flat. All right, now it's really hard to see, but they're flat. Okay, there we go. So that actually helps them stick to the surface here. They help them stick to the bottom, which makes it very difficult for this to pick up. Okay, so that's something to think about as well. If you can stick to the bottom, you're going to survive, reproduce, and have more offspring that will stick to the bottom. So you see here over time, after each generation, what was left behind, I allowed an opportunity to reproduce. So if there was a green one left over, I allowed it to reproduce, so I put another one in there. So you see over time how that population has changed. Now, is this going to happen everywhere? The answer is no. All right, the answer is no, because this is a very specific environment. If the beans were located in a different environment, a different variety might be able to survive. For example, on like a carpet, maybe different sized beans or different colored beans would blend in better, and they'd be able to survive. So remember that natural selection is all about the environment. It's all about the environment in which you're placed, because the environment controls what traits allow for better survival. It allows for what traits can survive, reproduce. And those traits are different based upon the environment. You obviously wouldn't see an organism that swims really well in the desert because that's not a trait that helps it survive. But you would certainly see something where it would only have to drink water every so often. That would be a good trait to have in the desert. Those organisms can live longer, survive, reproduce, and pass those traits on to the offspring. All right? Now, this isn't typically something that you see overnight, obviously. This would have to occur over tens of thousands of years and hundreds of generations. But the idea is still there, that natural selection is a process in which organisms can change over time because certain traits benefit a species in an environment. Organisms with those traits get to reproduce because they survive. Those that don't have the traits typically don't survive as long and can't reproduce. If you get to reproduce, you pass those genes on to the offspring. And we all know that organisms that have certain traits, their offspring typically will have those traits as well. All right? So just a couple ideas on natural selection I want to make sure that you understand. Bye.